Today's guest is one of Australia's most influential deal makers, David Williams, Managing Director of Kidder Williams, a powerhouse in corporate advisory. With over 35 years in the game, he shaped some of the nation's most iconic deals, from rescuing Tassal, expanding Bega Cheese, to bringing Vegemite back home. A sharp strategist with a deep passion for innovation. This is a conversation you won't want to miss. 30 years in mergers and acquisitions and advising ASX-listed companies and raising capital for so many brands, so many well-known Australian brands. It's a phenomenal experience and a phenomenal story behind you. Tell us, what makes a great deal?
It doesn't matter whether I'm looking at a deal for myself or a deal for Bega Cheese or a deal for Cadbury. People need to start with a really very honest acknowledgement about what they're really good at. I see probably 2 new deals a week, but if I were to buy them for myself, I probably only see 1 every 6 months that's good for me. There's a deal that's good for somebody, but not necessarily for me, because the way to make money out of that deal is really applying your talents. Now, most of those deals require something other than money. So if you take, for example, Tassal, which is the largest aquaculture business in the country, by a long, long way, and one of the most profitable. I bought that out of receivership for $42.5 million. It was broke. It needed money to pay the bank out, so it needed $42 million, but it also needed some new leadership. I'd been advising the company for 10 years in any case, so I knew it back to front. And I put in place new farm manager, new CEO, new CFO, the whole works. It needed more than money. And so I needed to have a vision about how I could fix it. And I had that vision because I'd already been advising him for 10 years. So I had a view about what you could do with that business, with Coles and Woolworths and exports and so forth, and also how you could expand that business. So the acquisition itself is typically never just a good acquisition. It's a good acquisition with you involved.
Sentiment that I'm hearing now is that Australian investors, by and large, they are risk-averse. Would you agree with that, or is it that there's something which is lacking in Australian innovation, that we are not able to attract the Australian investment market so much as compared to them going out and seeking investment from US or China?
To the extent that people are risk averse, I don't agree with that. I think people are not risk averse, and I can probably point you to 40 companies, listed companies, that have gone broke in the last 6 months in tech and in pharma, right? And some of those companies, by the way, did have good technology, but just didn't have enough cash. I often think of that as the company's fault. If you can't tell the story and convince people, then that's your problem, not the investor's problem. But the people who put money into those 40 odd companies, they've taken big risks. And the fact they've gone broke is evidence that they've taken big risks. But when you come to the institutional investors, the sophisticated investors, what the US has is not a difference in risk perception as though it's just a standalone concept. They have such depth of market and such depth of funds that if I go to see a fund in New York, I can go to see a fund that specialises in pharmaceuticals and medical devices. And so when I go to have a meeting, they'll bring in 2 of their staff who are doctors, so they know it.
So then what is it that entrepreneurs or technologists or anybody who's coming up with a product, how can they get that investment if they truly believe in their product? Welcome to Season 2 of Cask and Convos and our new home, the Urban Alley Brewery, right at the heart of Melbourne, District Docklands. Born from a love of great beer and a mission to bring world-class brews to Melbourne's doorstep, Urban Alley has been crafting award-winning beers that bridge the gap between mainstream and craft, blending tradition with innovation. With a state-of-the-art 25 hectoliter brew house and a 690-person brew pub, this is where bold flavors and even bolder conversations come to life. But great ideas don't just happen over a pint. They need the right space to grow. That's why we are teaming up with Natural Velocity, a co-working hub built for innovators and game changers. Because whether it's in business or at the bar, the best ideas happen when the right people come together. So grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's dive in. David, thank you so much for coming on board for Cask and Convos. We are super excited to have you over here.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And 30 years in mergers and acquisitions and advising ASX listed companies and raising capital for so many brands, so many well known Australian brands. It's a phenomenal experience and a phenomenal story behind you.
Yes.
Tell us, what makes a great deal?
Well, first of all, most of the work I do is in food and beverages and agriculture. So when you say you've done some work for great brands, it sort of comes naturally with the territory that you might be working for Coca-Cola or Cadbury or Vegemite or Bega. So I'm lucky that it's the focus that I've got that really leads to that sort of recognition, I suppose. Well, I'm noticed by people because of that. But what makes a great deal, I think, differs from buyer to buyer. But it doesn't matter whether I'm looking at a deal for myself or a deal for Bega Cheese or a deal for Cadbury. In every one of those, I think people need to start with a really very honest acknowledgement about what they're really good at. So, think about what it is that you're really good at, and then think about how you apply that to a particular acquisition. And I see probably 2 new deals a week. But if I were to buy them for myself, I probably only see one every 6 months that's good for me. There's a deal that's good for somebody, but not necessarily for me, because the way to make money out of that deal is really applying your talents. So if you think about it in terms of, let's say, Bega, who bought Vegemite for $450 million from Mondelez, what are they good at? And what were they not good at in that case? Because it turns out that Bega didn't have a very large sales and marketing force. But when you bought Vegemite, you not only bought an iconic brand, a profitable brand, and probably the most powerful brand in the country, in the sense of, supermarkets can't switch away from it. You don't go and say, I'm not going to take your Vegemite, I'll take Marmite. It's not going to happen. Okay, but so what Vegemite delivered was a beautiful business, and that might have been enough in itself. But the real icing on the cake for somebody like Bega is that it brings with it 40 sales and marketing people. So that if you were to take back the Bega brand, for example, from Fonterra, which is in the paper this week from a Supreme Court judgment on Monday, then you've got a sales and marketing team ready to go. And so it's those things where you really add value, and which really should cement whether it works for you or not. So now most of those deals require something other than money. There are occasionally a deal where it might be a distressed asset, and if you put in $10 million, it saves the company and it turns around straight away. But usually it needs more than money. It's very rare that it just needs money. And so if you take, for example, Tassal, which is the largest aquaculture business in the country by a long, long way, and one of the most profitable, I bought that out of receivership for $42.5 million. It was broke. And it needed money to pay out the bank because the 42 was owed to the ANZ Bank. Okay, so I look at that, and why was that deal right for me, and why didn't I sort of pass it off to somebody else? Well, let's forget about the second part, because the whole world came and looked, but it was not a good time in aquaculture, so they didn't come. But it needed money to pay the bank out, so it needed $42 million, but it also needed some new leadership. So, I'd been advising the company for 10 years in any case, so I knew it back to front. And I put in place new farm manager, new CEO, new CFO, the whole works. And really, apart from that, the dynamics of the industry changed a bit, but it needed more than money. And so I needed to have a vision about how I could fix it. And I had that vision because I'd already been advising him for 10 years. So I had a view about what you could do with that business, with Coles and Woolworths and exports and so forth, and also how you could expand that business. So I won't go into the detail of that because it's a little bit messy, but it had significant expansion. So when I bought it, I think I was doing, let's say, 4,000 tonnes of salmon a year. Now it's doing 40,000 tonnes of salmon. So it was a big geographical expansion, east, west coast, up north, and so forth, which took away a lot of risks, because one of the reasons it went broke in the first place was you had hot currents coming down the east coast of Australia, and the fish don't die, but they don't feed. So Coles are saying, give me fish out of the water at 3 kilos or 5 kilos, and you look in the pens and they're 1.5 kilos because the water's too warm. So that geographical diversification was something I knew needed to happen. So anyway, I've gone on too long about that, but the point is this, that whether it's me as an individual, and we'll come to this if you're talking about entrepreneurs and so forth, or whether it's a corporate, you need to have a clear view about what you're good at and how you're going to apply that to the acquisition itself. So the acquisition itself is typically never just a good acquisition. It's a good acquisition with you involved. And so how to do that. Now, there's another layer to this which is even more important than getting that right. The other layer is that when you're looking at an acquisition, you need to do a lot of work at the same time as doing your due diligence on what you're going to do in day one and day 100. It's like, right? Yes. So if I haven't got that, what I see people do is they make an acquisition, they say, oh, it's an iconic brand, thank you very much. And then they go back to their normal work and hope it'll just integrate itself. But these things need to be integrated. And if you go about it in a really structured way when you're doing your due diligence, then you'll shock yourself about how easy it is to get the synergies out of it. So there's many examples of this. But when I did the merger between Incitec Pivot and Incitec, which are both now fertiliser ag chemical companies, put them together, and Pivot was close to broke. It was nearly going under itself with the ANZ Bank as a banker. Put them together, but as we went through that 3, 4, 5 months of due diligence, we had a team from Incitec and a team from Pivot, and we put them together, and they had weekly meetings, and we just took the 5 key areas that were involved in fertiliser production, fertiliser distribution, pricing. And when we looked at it, the synergies were like $100 million a year, like unbelievable for a company like Pivot, which is a cooperative, that was going broke, like 100 million. It was so big that even though we'd gone through it rigorously, like if we had 1 ship instead of 2 and that sort of stuff, you couldn't fault the logic. But the number was so big that we didn't believe it ourselves. But can I tell you that they just came screaming out from day one, because we'd done all that work. And so there was a committee that would say, right, in this committee, it's going to disband and this is what we're going to do on day one. Let's do it. And it was so enthralling to see that, so exciting to see it, really, because I don't know what Incitec Pivot's capped at now, but it's probably $6-7 billion, and so that's what you need that second layer in understanding what it is you bring to an acquisition. So, and it's very easy to find acquisition sexy. There's areas where, even when I did Tassal, when you go into Collins Street or Pitt Street and you say to them, just stop people in the street and say, listen, I've got this investment, it's in aquaculture. You know what the first thing people say is? They go, oh, that's a business of the future, Or, I was on the board of Monash IVF. If I go into the street and talk to people about IVF, they go, oh, I'm interested in that because I know women would pay a lot of money for that, and they do. So there's some very sexy things that come up, but just because they're sexy, it doesn't mean you're going to be able to run them, and doesn't mean you're going to be able to add value. So that's the real question: is how can I make this run properly, better, and better value?
That's a very important point you've raised, because often when you're thinking of any change in the industry, people are always looking at that immediate effect, not thinking about that long-term view. And that is what is important, like what does the future look like, and almost backtracking from the future and looking at, okay, if we do take these decisions, how will it impact, say, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and that 100%, that makes a great deal.
But it's interesting though, because there are many industries and many businesses where there is rightfully a very exciting 2, 3, 4, 5 year view, where you're growing the business, like significantly growing the business off a platform, coming up with new products which are obvious in day one, let's say, and so forth. So there's plenty of those. But if you can't get the first 100 days right, my experience is you're going to struggle.
So tell me one thing. From agriculture, you have also invested now in a lot of technology products and a lot of technology brands. What caused that mind shift? Why technology after agriculture?
Well, it didn't really, it's not really a mind shift. I mean, today I have probably, and any day of the year, I've probably got a dozen acquisitions or sales going on in agriculture. And because agriculture and food are everywhere, I don't have the luxury of just going to Melbourne and Sydney. So, we're selling an abattoir in Darwin for AA & Co. We're selling Bundaberg Sugar in Bundaberg, Queensland. I'm selling Fremantle Octopus in Fremantle, WA. So we've got a dozen of these things going around the country. And so my team spends a lot of time on plains and in rural areas. So we continue to do that. And frankly, we can't get out of it, because if somebody's got something big in food to sell, we'll get asked. And we don't see everything, but we see, and everybody knows, we punch above our weight. And, it might be looking at Fonterra at the moment for bigger cheese or whatever. So that's ongoing. But I see, as I said earlier, I see probably 2 deals a week where somebody comes in the door and they go, look, I've got this business I want to sell, or this business I want to buy, or this business I want to finance. And so I look at it through my lens and with the help of my team. And, because if it's, depending on what it is, I'll drag in a couple of my team that have got an interest in the area, or we've done deals in the area, or whatever like that. So, and then we look at it and we make an assessment of, okay, can we help them or not? And a lot of times that's as much to do with whether the deal can bear our fees. If somebody comes in with a business worth $5 million, they're not going to pay us $500,000 to do a deal, right? So partly that's it. But we see everybody, and we see everybody not just to be nice and give them feedback. People think we're great because we give them feedback and so forth, but what they don't realise is I'm getting more out of it than them, because I'm learning how people are thinking. I'm learning what's starting up and what's not starting up, and I get to pick the eyes out of it, And this is really powerful. Even for people who've got a lot of money. There's a man in Melbourne who recently said to me, look, I'll give you $2 million to set up a little business over here where you and I'll split your deals, your personal deals, 50-50. I said, well, why do I need you? And more particularly, why do you need me? And he said, well, I've got $1 billion, but the deals I'm seeing have already been picked over by everybody. So we get an early look at some of these deals. And so what am I saying? I go back to my principle that I said, look, you've got to figure out what you're good at. And so if I see a deal, I don't care whether it's in food or ag. I know food and ag, of course. But in those industries, a lot of the buyers, I can't add anything. If I'm selling a sugar mill in Queensland, unless it's like a throwaway price and nobody else has seen it, it's going to be better bought by a sugar processor out of Thailand or India or, somewhere else in the world. So I don't have much to add to those. I'm looking for what I can actually add, And so some of those tech businesses have been, and pharmaceutical businesses, as you'll know, have been businesses where, I've added value just by changing the management team and raising money as well. So money, yes, but something else. What else? And so if you look at some of those successes, like, for example, Polynovo, which makes a foam product for wound care, when I went in to help with that, they came to me again and said, look, we see what you've done with the green whistle, because I had the green whistle, which is in all the ambulances, and that was going fantastically. So I said, could you come and do the same in Polynovo? So, when I went in, it had like 6 staff, market cap of 20 million, and I thought, I know how to fix this, because you do your due diligence first, right? Okay, beautiful product. Not only a beautiful product, but a platform product. So I'm using it as a platform for, let's say, wound care, but next thing, people are using it for cancer, burns, they're using it for diabetic foot ulcers, they're using it inside the body for spina bifida and things like this. So you could see that your 3 and 5 year question before, you could see where this thing was going to go, but you had to fix the first 100 days first. So what I went out and raised 13 million, put 20 people on when I only had 6. And I put people on before they were needed. So we didn't have a product in the market, but I put a manufacturing guy on. We didn't have a product in the market, but I put a quality and a regulatory person on, you know. And so these people filled up the space because they're getting ready for when the product's going to just spit out the end of the tube, you know. So here we are now, and the business is $1 billion, you know, and very high margin, selling to every major burns hospital in the US, every major hospital in Australia, every major hospital in New Zealand, UK, etc. And it's still growing, you know, 30-40%. So, and that's because I've got this 3 and 5 year view now where what we're doing generically in wound care, going like a rocket. There isn't hardly a surgeon on the planet, I don't think, who hasn't heard of us. Like we're in India now, for example, right? And I've got, I don't know, 30 people in India, and it's now starting to really take off. But all the surgeons have heard about it because they're not sitting in Chennai, you know, with no view of the world. They're reading the burns journals, they're going to burns conferences, and they're hearing polynova, polynova, polynova. So, you know, many of these surgeons are just waiting for it. And when there's a problem, we get called up because they might not be registered there yet, or it might be too expensive for them, you know. And so we've given a lot of product away this year. I think we gave $500,000 worth of product to Tel Aviv hospitals. I think there was another big lot of stuff went into Gaza, but through Turkey. We gave a lot of product to Belgrade, to Serbia, where a couple of boys have been train surfing on this train, held onto the electricity. 95% burns their body and burns a lot of their internal organs. So, you know, we get, for one boy alone, we probably gave $400,000 worth of product to make him whole again, you know. So, but how did that come about? It comes about because somebody rings me and says, we've got this real problem, David, and the surgeons need your product, but it's not registered here, you know. So then we got to say, well, how do we get quick registration? Take it to the Minister for Health, get him to stamp it, you know, and off you go. And in the end, a lot of those will end up in the country itself then registering it more quickly, but also paying for it.
So they are themselves becoming the advocates.
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell me one thing, with everything that you've told me just now, you know, it's coming to me that you have a very open mind. You're willing to hear, absorbing all the ideas, learning constantly, and then, you know, looking for those right opportunities. But if you go out into the market, the general sentiment that I'm hearing now is that Australian investors, by and large, they are risk averse. Would you agree with that, or is it that, you know, there's something which is lacking in Australian innovation, that we are not able to attract the Australian investment market so much as compared to them going out and seeking investment from US or China?
Yeah. So look, there's a number of questions within questions there, to do with innovation, to do with entrepreneurial step, to do with whether there's a different market in Australia to whether there is in the US. To the extent that people are risk averse, I don't agree with that. I think people are not risk averse, and I can probably point you to 40 companies, listed companies, that have gone broke in the last 6 months in tech and in pharma, right? And some of those companies, by the way, you know, did have good technology, but just didn't have enough cash. But so I often think of that as the company's fault. You know, if you can't tell the story and convince people, then that's your problem, not the investor's problem. But the people who put money into those 40 odd companies, they've taken big risks. And the fact they've gone broke is evidence that they've taken big risks. Where we have, and the same is in the US. So I don't look at what I'll call the mum and dad investors as being terribly different from in the US. There are some minor differences, which I'll come to, but when you come to the institutional investors, the sophisticated investors, what the US has is not a difference in risk perception as though it's just a standalone concept. They have such depth of market and such depth of funds that if I go to see a fund in New York, I can go to see a fund that specialises in pharmaceuticals and medical devices. And so when I go to have a meeting, they'll bring in 2 of their staff who are doctors, so they know it. When I go to see a typical Australian fund, they don't have doctors. There have been over the journey one or two doctors and then gone back to practice or then gone to be an analyst. But the depth over there of the market means that you can get a lot more specialisation, And so I think that's the only big difference that I would see. But with a knockout product, let's say like Polynovo, that got funded first of all for the first 2 or 3 raises, by me through the Australian marketplace and through fund managers. So that now I would have, I don't even know, 60 fund managers from Australia on the register, and I've probably got another 40 from overseas. Now it helps when you get in the index, because when you get in the index, there's a lot of funds around the place that need to buy into your stock. So I have a group, for example, in Greenland that I've never even heard of, never even met, who have got 500,000 shares that they bought at $2.50 because I was in the index. They just have to look at the index worldwide and back that. So I think that's one big difference is the depth of market. But you can't then take that on to talk about how innovative Australia is versus not. Okay, to the extent that you can get funding easier from knowledgeable investors in the US, sure, that might affect innovation, but it's a worldwide market. So if I've got something here that does pap smears or IVF or ears or whatever, brain or whatever, there are people in the US you'd go to if you couldn't get it done here, But when you think about Australia and the level of innovation here, you can't be but anything but proud of what we've actually achieved, especially in some of these tech areas. So, okay, I'll come to tech in a moment, but if you just look where I am in pharmaceuticals, and so there's a dozen companies that are worth more than $5 billion, and I'm talking about ResMed, I'm talking about Cochlear, I'm talking about Pro Medicus, I'm talking, et cetera, and my little, Polynovo over here at 1.5 billion, it'll be there as well. Telex, radio pharmaceuticals and so forth. I mean, we're punching way above our weight in cancer and radio pharma, with people like Clarity, Telex, radio pharma, the US are just getting onto this. So we've been unbelievably successful in medtech and in pharmaceuticals. And people keep trumpeting about how Israel's the best and so on and so forth. Well, they're unbelievable, but we're not too far behind. And we're only a small country. Now, when you go to tech, that's moving off pharma and pharmaceutical devices. Look at tech. So we're just having a meeting tomorrow with the guys that started Afterpay. If you can start a business in Australia like Afterpay, and it just took off. And next thing you got $30 billion. But look at the Atlassian boys. Look at Canva. There's so many unbelievable tech companies which are not concentrated in Australia. You've got to get offshore. So to get offshore, you've got to have a product that's really competitive, that can get through the regulatory hurdles really quickly. If it's tech, it's much easier than what it is if I've got a pharmaceutical product. But I find even with my Polynovo, I mean, this will shock you, that I'm getting used in countries where I'm not registered. I'm getting used in countries where it's registered for things that are not indicated, because I can't stop the surgeons, and we had a case just recently in Germany where they pulled 30 surgeons together on a Friday night just to hear about how to use our product. We're in Germany and Austria and Switzerland. And the first speaker was a female surgeon who had a woman who was pregnant, 6 months pregnant. They do a scan on the baby and it's got spina bifida. In other words, the spine's not covered. She makes a decision to go in utero to the baby. She puts a piece of, because the baby's only 6 months, it puts a little bit of our foam onto the spine, stitches it in, baby comes out, job done.
Oh, wow.
Now, I just heard they've just done a second one.
That's
in
phenomenal.
Germany.
That's
phenomenal. You and I could sit around on a whiteboard for 2 years. We would never come up with spina bifida, And I got approached by a woman from Yale who's a professor of ophthalmology, a doctor, and she said, I'm using your product because I'm reconstructing corneas, and I like to pack the cornea with your product, knowing it'll disappear in 4 to 6 weeks, but it integrates with the local tissue as it does. So again, I mean, we're getting used for all sorts of things, which is my 3 to 5 year view about where do we go. Now I'm not saying as a company we necessarily want to chase all those products, but some of them will be just very niche, small products that I don't need to sort of worry too much about. But with products where people come up with ideas that are going to be blockbusters, then we need to spend a bit of time thinking about, do we need to do a clinical trial? Do we need more data? How do we market it, etc. So I've probably gone way off the track there. I'm not sure. But anyway, the short story is we are not short on innovation, not at all. We've got as many good ideas as any country's got. And it sort of riles me when every city around the world says, oh, we're the best in this, we're the best in that. Come here and I'll show you. And even this is a problem for ourselves, by the way, because part of the people who poo-poo this are people who are in the industry. So you'll often hear from people who haven't got enough cash in pharmaceuticals, oh, I'm going to go to the US and I'm going to list in the US because that's the money there is a much higher multiple. No, I don't think so. It's not that at all. Sometimes you can point to educated fund managers who are better to make a decision, but in the main, it's no different. And to the extent that there is a difference, you can go over there and get it.
So then what is it that entrepreneurs or technologists or anybody who's coming up with a product, what is it that they should look to either put in their product or to approach an investor? Like how can they get that investment if they truly believe in their product?
Yeah. Well,
or maybe what as an investor are you looking?
Yeah, well, I think if the fact that they truly believe in their product, for me, is something I just put aside because everybody truly believes in their product. I truly believe in my sons, but that doesn't mean they're right, all the time. But it's the same with product. And so the first thing I ask people who come to see me if they've got nothing more than an idea, they come and say, well, what do you think about the idea? And I overlay on top of that our expertise or experience that we've got in that area, if we've got it. There'll be areas where we don't, but if it was in food, beverages, we got a view of the whole industry where we know where it's going to be sourced, we know where it's going to be sold, we know how it's regulated, we know the growth trajectory, we know the export market. So if you come up with a new product and say, this is my product, I'm going to overlay all that experience and I'm going to use that just to push and pull the entrepreneur. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? What are you going to do about this? And oftentimes those people are ill prepared. So it's one thing to have a good idea, but is the idea really good? And so you've got to, in the main, I think, sensible people will go away, get a bit of family money and friends money, and it might only be a few $100,000, but then put some people around themselves to start building it up. Because no matter how smart you are, no matter how good you are, you can't do it on your own. And I say this to my own staff when we're writing a report for somebody, don't hold on to the report until you think it's finished. Let's just get it out and get it around the office, and we're going to get lots of ideas from grammar right through to we've missed something important, so let's go and do some more work, And so you need, as I said with Polynova, I had 6 staff. Next thing I had 26. And I had people that I really didn't need just yet, but those people, like a regulatory woman or a quality woman, would already be writing manuals about how we're going to get the product out, how we're going to check the quality, getting ourselves ready for audits of TGA and FDA and so forth. There's lots to do.
It's helping you hit the market much faster.
100%.
Yeah, instead of getting blocked.
So I might have had an idea like Polynova before Polynova was done, and I go to see somebody just on my own, go, look, I'm a chemist, I can make this polymer that disappears and it won't poison you when you put it on and things like that. I could do that. But I need the quality woman to have told me, yeah, we can do it. I need the reg person to say, yeah, this can be registered. It might not be able to be registered. It might already be registered. Somebody else might already have the patents and so forth. So you need all of this stuff because no serious investor is going to put money behind it unless you've grub-staked it a bit with your family and friends and done some of this basic work.
And I think one thing which you've fundamentally pointed out is that core difference between just a product development, versus thinking about a product strategically. It's not just about the core product and what it looks like and how it functions, but thinking about what sort of market you're going to hit. Are you ready for those markets or not, from a regulatory compliance perspective, or even from a cost perspective, and and from a growth perspective, how will you grow your product? What's the core offering that you have? And that's one thing which we've also seen when we are talking to entrepreneurs. They are so focused in developing that first iteration which needs to hit the market, that they are not thinking about what is the strength of their product that can actually set them apart from any competitor and make them sustain. Actually, talking about sustainability, that's become a big item nowadays. But as an investor, how important is product sustainability to you?
It's I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because I'm much more pessimistic about this whole ESG thing than most other people. So, but let me give you a slightly more considered answer, because I look at it from what is the reality of sustainability in terms of how I can make the product work. So I look at it the other way around. That I'm not going to go up to Papua New Guinea, which I do at the moment. There's some food companies up there, but it's very dangerous, and there's all sorts of logistical problems, as you might imagine. But there's no use going up there and going, right, first and foremost, I'm going to look after the local people around my gold mine, or whatever it happens to be. You've got to look at it much more holistically. And if it doesn't work financially, then forget about sustainability. It's just nothing, and I see, when I'm interested in sustainability, I'm not really interested in the Australian landscape. Okay, I'm more interested in how can I get more out of a piece of land. How could I change farming practices that would get more out of the land? Now, there might be some practices I could change which are illegal or not accepted by the market. So I might have gene technology on my cotton or corn or whatever, where some markets won't take it. But I'm not much interested in the ESG aspects of that. I think, just run a business as best you can. And now, if the market's not accepting palm oil, well, they're not accepting palm oil. There's no use going and growing it knowing you're not going to have a market for it. That's not being good on ESG. It's just being good on the realities of what markets are. But look, there's all sorts of aspects to this ESG. You'll see just generally, when it comes to diversity and things like that, and even before embolden a lot of people to just jettison this now, work from home, diversity, etc., etc. I find it very frustrating as an owner of businesses and frustrating. So I'll give you a good example. Let's take Polynovo, where I've got 300 employees now, probably 150 in the US and 150 outside the US, mainly Australia. And if I look at diversity just alone, I'm roughly 50-50. It turns out, not because I believe in diversity, it turns out that that's the industry. There's a lot of women in quality and reg and in sales and marketing. So that's the numbers just drop out. So I don't have to go out and say I want 10 more women. However, I'm now, with so many people in the US, I'm now getting criticised because I haven't got enough Hispanics or African Americans, and it's just like, no, I'm just trying to buy the best salesperson for Texas. That's all I want. I don't give a rat's whether they're male, female, black, Hispanic. So that's now getting jettisoned a lot. And I think it was the head of Unilever who's been the sort of poster child for ESG for a long time. A couple of months ago, came out of his AGM and said, listen, we've had enough of this ESG. It's costing us too much. We're abandoning it. That doesn't mean they're going to be bad boys. It just means I'm not going to spend so much money trying to prove to people, what a good guy I am.
Yeah. And I think going back to the diversity part of it, being a woman, myself, I feel that if I'm getting hired for the sake of checking that diversity box, I wouldn't want to be hired like that. I want to be hired for what I'm bringing to the table and the value that I'm creating for a company. instead of feeling that, oh, I was the diversity checkbox and that's why you hired me, and you truly do not have any use of me. That is actually kind of detrimental to the whole aspect of
Well, look, I'm glad to hear you say that, but I mean, just coincidentally, I had a meeting yesterday with the head of one of the banks, a female, and or just left, but and she said exactly the same thing to me. She said, you know what, when I got hired, I went home and I wondered, did I get hired because I was the best, or did I get hired because I was a woman? You know, um, the answer to that is going to be in individual cases. So at the one end of the spectrum, I can give you examples where chairmen will come to me because they've been getting beaten up by the fund managers, and they go, you've only got one woman on a board of 8, get another woman. And so a chairman will say to me, Dave, find me another woman. And you go, yeah, but what do you want? Like, do you want one who's got experience in marketing or corporate governance, law, finance? You know, what do you want? No, I don't care. Just get me a woman. So there has been in the more recent past many examples where that's happened, where they're trying to beef up the board. Now, it's not frivolous at all, because when you force them to think about, well, what do I really want? If I'm a food company, if I'm Coca-Cola, you know, it'd be great if I had somebody who'd worked in food distribution or Coles and Woolies, or, you know, manufacturing, just so that they actually brought some skills to the board. So I think, you know, that's happened, but there's been a lot of rebalancing now in terms of numbers of women on board. But I think in the main, it's well thought out. And gee, at the CEO level, there wouldn't be many CEOs getting a job on the basis I just described. You know, oh, we need a new CEO, get me a woman. Well, hang on, you know, it's much more rigorous than that.
So we've actually segued into a very interesting topic, boards. A lot of products, when they start to mature, a lot of services as well, they then decide to go to that level where, you know, they feel that the need for a board or an advisory board. What are some things that you would advise in terms of composing your board?
So you need to start with a lens on how big the company is and what it does and what its growth prospects are. So if I'm looking at putting together a board that's a startup, small market cap, let's say 50 mil, you know, I know the company's not going to be able to afford a full complement of management as if it was $1 billion company. You know, so it probably won't have a HR person, definitely won't have an in-house lawyer, yeah, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, when you're putting together boards at that level, I personally want to see a working board, not a board that works, but a board that's got experience in the key areas that the business is interested in, and that can help management. So when you're sitting around the board to say to management, look, if we're going to go into the US, then I would advise, here's 2 or 3 consultants you should use, you know, or go talk to this guy. So not to do his work, but to use your experience to open it up. Now, just imagine if you thought growing a business was on a continuum. You start with a $20 million business, next thing it's 500 million. And so a whole lot of things change. A whole lot of things change under corporations law and ASX rules and corporate governance and that, because of size, you know, whether you need to do 4 Cs every quarter and a whole lot of things. Anyway, but what also changes is that people expect you to report in different ways. Like we're talking about ESG. You know, if you're a $20 million company, nobody's coming and criticising you, you know what I mean? But if you're 10 billion, you're going to have every fund manager in the world asking you what you've done. So as you go through that continuum from 20 million to $1 billion, let's say, you know, there's a lot of pressure on you, not that you don't want to do it, to start to put people in places that you didn't have before. So if I'm a $20 million company and I've got 20 staff, do I really need a head of HR? Probably not. You know, my CFO can do the payroll and the superannuation and so forth. But by the time you get to $1 billion company, say like I am in Polynovo, where you've got 300 staff, and they're all around the world, so you've got whole sort of lots of tax and incentive structures and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And people want to see whistleblower policies and all of the things that go with being big. And so when you get up to those big companies, I still personally think you need a working board. doesn't. But you might need a different quality of people, just like you might need a different quality of staff. So if I have a CFO at 20 million, all I want him to do is use my books, or one of the packages. By the time you get up to $1 billion, and you're in 40 countries, like I'm probably Novo in 46 countries, so you got all the FX issues and accounting issues. Oh my God, let alone HR. But even then, I think what I see as different is making sure your management grows intellectually and experientially with the growth in the company. The board itself might also change, but it might not. So, for example, in pharmaceutical companies, it's very common to see some academics on the board to start with, who are key opinion leaders or an expert in biology or something like that. And but after the company's up and running with a product, with a medical board, with key opinion leaders all around the world, maybe that guy's not needed, And so, because the thing to watch out for with a working board is that oftentimes you might be looking at putting people on who do not have board experience. And so when you've got issues with corporate governance with ASX and ASIC and all the other sort of regulatory authorities like FIRB and ACCC and so forth, you want to have people who, can protect the company and know what good corporate governance is. What I don't want to do is just go to the same old, 75-year-old band of guys that all went to school together and they're only interested in corporate governance. We all are interested in corporate governance, but can I get somebody who can bring a bit more than that? So now, a subset of that is, do you have an advisory board or not? And you'll see this is mainly in pharmaceutical companies and device companies where the board itself is really structured around people like me, but then might be an advisory board of half a dozen people from all around the world who are experts, subject matter experts in the product that you're trying to develop. And the jury's still out for me on what the strength of that, whether you have to have an advisory board to get that sort of advice. I think you definitely need the advice, but I'm just not sure how best to structure it.
Okay, all right. So then now coming back to the future, in a way, for future technologists and future startups, what is it that you would advise so that they can start right?
Well, as I said before, first of all, you've got to have an idea. But before you start romancing that idea too widely amongst more sophisticated funders, get some people around you, paid or unpaid, doesn't really matter. Take a little bit of money from your family and that, and as I said, it might be 50, it might be 100,000, just enough to start getting some bits of advice. And some of those bits of advice might be really technical, like, can I register this idea? Is it already gone? So get yourself prepared is what I say, and then you're going to have to demonstrate to people, once you've gone through that phase, and it'll be 6 months for sure, and maybe more, you're going to have to convince people like me that the idea's sound and that the market need is there. So, and oftentimes, you hear good ideas, but when you go and scratch the surface, it already exists in other places, so, which might be good, might be bad, depending on what your market is. If your market's just Australia and you find the same products in Canada, okay, it's not such a bad thing because I can probably go and get that Canada data. And now I've got some certainty about how it is really working. I see their numbers, I see their data and so forth. So, for example, we own a business called Mobile Tyre Shop, which comes to your home or office and changes your tyres. Cheaper than the tyre stores. And you don't have to leave your home. You can still be watching the football on the couch and the guy 45 minutes can change 4 tyres and balance them. Fantastic. So the guy that runs that stole that idea, basically. He was in London and he saw somebody doing it and he thought they were stealing a car, so he went and challenged them. No, it was a tyre service. So it turns out he thought that was such a great idea, but he scratched the surface, did a bit of work, and what did he find? In the UK alone, there's 2,500 tyre vans that just go around. So the tyre shops are going, and it's all vans now. Now, okay, same in Canada, same in Germany. So we've got all this data, So even though this business is growing like topsy, it's growing like 50% a year. It's got 50 vans on the road, but it should have 500. So it's a lot of growth still. Okay, so I can make money out of that. I don't need to go to Canada and compete. In fact, I won't, but I can make money out of it in my own market, and you get a first mover advantage as well. So I'm confident that we can keep that product. So that's one thing. The other thing I'd tell you is just looking at what happens around the world, so that things change and some businesses become more or less profitable and so forth. So 25% or 100% tariffs, right? Now, the biggest tyre manufacturers in China, they can't get their tyres into the US. So one of them, we know very well, sold last year 50 million tyres into the US. So where are they going to put those? They're not going to go into the US. They're not going to come to Australia. You can get some in Australia, some in New Zealand, etc. But so those people are then looking at my business, and this goes right back to where we started. What do you bring to the business? So, okay, what I bring to the business, I'm the majority shareholder, is funds and getting the right people in place. We're grown like topsy. I don't have to do anything. Okay, but when somebody else looks at it, they look at it through their lens. So that same Chinese company that now can't sell 50 million tyres, they look at my business and they go, when a person rings up and says, I want tyres, the person on the other side says, what type of tyres? Oh, I've got an Aston Martin that needs Pirelli. Or they go, I don't care, I just want the cheapest. Give me the cheapest, right? So a Chinese manufacturer looks at our business and knows, if they don't know, I tell him, that 25, 30% of people who call don't give a shit, right? They just want the cheapest tyre. So now I'm the biggest in online. They say, oh, we need you, and maybe we can even take the tech, by the way, and take it to China. But let's just look at Australia. And we need you. And if we put money in, you can go to 100 vans straight away. And we're getting all those tyres. Now, these people, just so you sort of see the dynamics of an industry, these people have gone to the Bob Janes of the world, all the tyre shops, and they've all got their own cheap-ass tyre. You know what I mean? They've got the Bob Jane, and here's another one when people ask them for the cheapest tyre. So they can't get in. So we're a way in, and that's the way in which I could sell that business or raise equity at a higher price, because they're looking at it through a different lens.
And you've mentioned a very important point, which often a lot of entrepreneurs overlook when they're looking for investments. They're just looking at the dollar figures, not the value that an investor can get to their business. 100%. And I think that is so important, because you want that investor to be invested in the long run and really vouch for your business in a way. One of the people who advocates your business and helps you grow.
Yeah. Well, think about it. The flip side of that coin is, think about it from the point of view of a private equity fund or just a high net worth family, right? Really, all they've got is money. So, and that's why I said, things always need something more than money. So the PE funds are adept at having a bus full of people that can go in and manage a business and cut the costs out and so forth. Family offices are not that sophisticated. Some of them are good, but most of them are not. And so it's only money. So what they're looking at when they're investing in a business like a startup, they're looking at the person. And they're going, I'm putting all my money behind you. The idea is one thing, but I don't want to see you sleeping in it in the morning. I don't want to see you get the stitch. I don't want to see you taking holiday. I don't want to see you paying yourself big money and travelling up the pointy end of the plane. So they're investing in a person, and trying to, put a surrogate in for what do I bring to this, because they don't bring anything,
Yeah, true. On that note, it's been a great conversation, and I think we've learned a lot today. Lots and lots of gold nuggets in this conversation, and I'm sure the right people will know exactly what to do with this. If they don't, then I think they are at a loss. So thank you so much, David, for joining us today. It's been great, and I think I would like to wrap this conversation with just one last tiny question. If somebody has to approach you ever for investment, what would be 2 or 3 things that they need to have up their sleeve?
Well, first things first, I said before, we see anybody because we might learn something ourselves. So and even if it's way too small for us, it might be good for one of our clients, or if I can't give the advice, I could pass it on to somebody who could, So I'll give you an example. There's an Indigenous group that's got a carbonated waters business, and they need some help in canning and so forth. So who do I go? I go to Bundaberg Ginger Beer Drinks, who we're very close to, just built a brand new plant in Bundaberg, and we make that sort of introduction. I don't get anything off it, and I don't want anything off it. I just want to help, entrepreneurs coming up, in this case in an Indigenous guy. It doesn't matter to me, Indigenous or otherwise. It's just like helping somebody for what has cost me nothing. Now, the guy at Bundaberg Drinks, John McLean, who runs it, might say, Dave, thanks very much. Beautiful deal, thanks. But I don't need anything on that. I just want him to think good of me. And if a deal comes along in 10 years' time, okay, think about me, But so when somebody comes to see me, we'll see everybody. But before they come, I'll usually only take the meeting if you give me something to read beforehand. So I don't want to just do it cold. Somebody walks in the door, they give me some, rat's ass idea, No, put it down on paper. Even if it's only one page, just tell me what it is you got, what problem you're solving, and just give me some high level thinking on the market, and then I can say some of those meetings I might not take. I might just go, you know what, you're talking to the wrong guy. This is a HR issue, the HR bit of tech. I'll introduce you to Andrew Bassett at Seek, or something like that, So
I think I'm going to take that advice for any cold calls or cold touches on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a hard time finding that, so I'm going to take that. Thank you so much, David, for being with us today. It's been great having you.
Thank you for bringing me to a bar. I mean, this is at 11:40 in the morning.
I think we should order some drinks.
Yeah, I've got to do a call at 12,
Thank you.
No problems.
From data management and product innovation to regulatory compliance, whether it's optimizing costs or enhancing efficiencies, dotinfinity is your partner for solving tricky problems with a human-centric and tech-powered approach. Connect with us at contact@dotinfinity.co.